Hello, dear chess friends. Welcome to Training Tuesday episode number 5. Today I'm going to show you one of the most exciting games in my life. It was played during my recent tournament in Gütersloh. It was a 5-round tournament where I managed to show a good result. Well, I could have played better, but I have what I have, so sometimes it happens. Okay, so why it will be useful and interesting for you. So first of all, this game was quite fun. And my second purpose, and probably the main one, is to show you how I make decisions in chess, because during previous shows we discussed a lot this topic of decision making in chess. So it's time to show you how I do that, right, over the board. So a few seconds we get to the chess content. I hope now it should work fine. So in this game I played with white pieces, and it was a round number 4. So as I said previously, it was only 5 rounds tournament. So I had 2 hours and a half at that moment. And actually I needed a win to catch up the leaders, because there were already 2 guys having 100%. Well, actually not 2, but 3, because my opponent, despite being rated only 2015 points FIDE, also had 3 points out of 3, and he managed to win all 3 games against much higher rated players. So it was kind of interesting encounter. I did a preparation, so usually I did not prepare for players rated like Patrick. However, having in mind that he won 3 games against much higher rated players, well, I understood that probably he's underrated and plays quite good. That's why I did a preparation, and I expected Sicilian Dragon. So in several games that I found in Mega Database, Patrick played exactly Sicilian Dragon. However, after playing e4, he reacted with the c6. And I just understood that, okay, it is a surprise. I didn't prepare Caracan. I have several opening setups against Caracan. But what is interesting, I never really played against Caracan on the high level. So I used to play against Caracan when I was a kid, but when I became a chess master, I almost never faced Caracan. That's why my preparation is kind of virtual. So I have some lines, I know the theory, okay, but when you only know the theory and do not practice, well, your knowledge is not that great, actually. So you have to make a lot of work over the board. So after c6, I played, of course, d4. After d5, sometimes in blitz games, for example, I play Panov attack, which starts after ed5, cd5, and c4. So in many cases, white is not against playing with the isolated queen's pawn. So here the character of the positions it's very close to queen's gambit accepted, for example, and white has quite active play. But in serious games, I mean in tournament games, I usually play knight c3 or knight d2. It is not a big difference. There is no big difference between knight c3 and knight d2, because usually black takes on e4, which leads to a transposition. So knight d2 has some additional advantages if black opts for not taking on e4 but playing something like g6, for example. So in this case, white has additional option of protecting d4 pawn with the help of c3 when bishop appears on g7. That's why I prefer just playing knight d2 recently. So knight e2, my opponent took on d4, knight takes e4, and bishop to f5. Of course, there are also some moves possible, like knight f6, probably even g6, but that is definitely not the main line. So main moves are bishop to f5, knight to f6, allowing white to damage the pawn structure, however, having some sort of active play to compensate that. And of course, very solid and quite interesting continuation, knight d7, which prepares knight to f6. And in that case, if white takes on f6, black naturally recaptures with the knight and completes development easily without damaging the pawn structure. Bishop f5 is considered the main line, and it leads to the very now popular, well-known tabia. After knight goes to g3, bishop to g6, white plays h4, immediately challenging the bishop, so there is a threat of playing h5, trapping the bishop, so usually black plays h6. Why not h5? Because h5 creates a weakness on h5, and white has very easy plan of attacking this pawn immediately with the help of bishop on e2 and the knight from f4, for example. So this is just a dubious decision for black. So h6, white plays knight f3, intending to jump to e5, again challenging the bishop and occupying very tempting outpost. So in some cases black allows, in some lines black allows white to do that and just ignores this threat, but the main line goes knight to d7, so normal development move, just controlling e5 square and preventing knight e5. So here white grabs the space first, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to h7, after which white usually plays bishop to d3. So nothing new here. It is a typical idea for white to exchange this light squared bishop, because if white doesn't do that, well, this bishop will influence the position so much because it controls central e4 square, it exerts pressure on c2. Whenever, let's say, white plays c4, grabbing the space, this bishop will control the whole diagonal. And let's imagine if white castles long, which happens quite frequently in this opening line, well, this bishop will be very dangerous to white's king. Moreover, if we don't exchange bishops here, there is a question where to put our light squared bishop. On e2 it will be passive, on c4 it will be just limited with black's pawn chain after e6, so it's not very easy to find a good spot for this bishop. That's why it is just an additional reason to exchange it immediately here. So bishop goes to d3, bishop takes, queen takes, e6, and now white has a choice between putting dark squared bishop on d2 immediately or on f4. So it's very hard to estimate the difference between two continuations. In many cases, they just lead to same positions, and which is just a transposition. I usually prefer to start with the bishop f4 move because, in my opinion, it limits black's resources. So c7 square is controlled now, queen can't occupy this square immediately. The same is about bishop to d6 possibility, so it is also prevented. That's why I love the bishop on f4. My opponent reacted quite quickly here, so he played queen to a5 check. It is quite typical move because black prepares castling long in many cases. At the same time, from a5, as you can see, bishop challenges my, not bishop, but queen challenges my pawn on h5. So despite being quite useful pawn here, quite active and annoying one, because it just ensures white's advantage in space on the king side, this pawn quite often becomes a target for black's pieces, so it becomes just a headache for white, especially if everything is being exchanged and goes closer to the endgame stage. So in the endgame stage, this h5 will be more weakness than a power. So queen a5, check. And another point here that white doesn't really have anything better than bishop to d2. Because if white wants to castle alone, and actually it is probably the best opportunity for white, since pawn on h5 is there, and actually castling short in many cases will be quite dangerous, because it will be not so easy to protect h5 pawn in case of several attacks from black's side. So white usually castles long here, and after this check, if white plays, for example, c3, it will be very hard to get rid of the queen on a5, and since it is so hard, it's not possible to castle, because a2 will be hanging. That's the problem. That's why white usually plays bishop to d2. Exchanging queens is also not a good idea. We just discussed that the closer the game goes to the endgame stage, the more noticeable becomes the vulnerability of the h5 pawn. And white, of course, loses a great part of his opponent initiative here. So bishop goes to d2, which means that black managed to get rid of the bishop on this active position on f4. Of course, black has to lose several tempi maybe, but anyway, as you can see, some additional options for occupying quite suitable squares appeared after this check. So one of possible moves here is just to play queen to c7, but my opponent played probably the most interesting move, so he played bishop to b4, developing the bishop, and at the same time offering the exchange, because this exchange will probably favor black, because position will become not so complicated. And again, in general, the exchanges favor black long term, so white has to avoid that, which means that c3 is more or less forced here. But at first glance, it looks like just a normal tempo move. Bishop goes to e7 here. Of course, not to f8, not back to f8, because it will be just a waste of time. So bishop goes to e7, occupying quite typical position. Not very active one, but okay, still better than on f8. And now again, if white wants to castle long, he has to play c4. And that is the idea of black here. So after c4, queen goes to c7, finally occupying this typical Caro-Kann square for a queen. From here, this queen supports c5. At the same time, controls f4 square, which might be quite critical in several lines. So in some cases, black has a chance to occupy this square with a minor piece, for example, with the bishop or with the knight, it depends. At the same time, this queen just exerts some sort of pressure on the knight g3, just limiting white's possibilities of playing with the f-pawn at some point, which is also quite useful for black. And, well, black is ready to castle long if he wants. So what was the point of forcing white to play c4? Because at first glance, it looks like white only did what he wanted, right? So grab the space, improve the situation in the center. Now white controls much more squares in the center. White is ready to play d4, d5 at some point, just performing this typical breakthrough. In fact, it is not that great achievement for white, because c4 pawn is a target. So as you can see, black is ready to castle long, but black at the same time still has a chance to castle short. And when white castles long, let's just imagine that, black will have a great hook for developing the initiative on the queen side. So it is b7, b5, quite a typical idea for black in Caro-Kann when white already has a pawn on c4. So now white has to be very careful, because in many cases this b5 will be just very annoying, after which it will be not possible, for example, to keep the control over d5 square. So in both cases, if white takes on b5 or plays c5, d5 becomes weakened, and it will be a great outpost for black's knight, for instance. So that is the basic idea of black's setup here. And as I said in the very beginning, my knowledge in Caro-Kann are not that great, and I don't have uh, you know, deep preparation here. So I know basic ideas, of course. I know several classic games. I know what to do in the middle game stage, what kind of end games are good for white, what kind of end games are good for black, and so on. But I don't have this, concrete move by move preparation. So it is already move number 15 for white, and I needed to make a decision over the board because, as I said, I didn't have a concrete setup here for white. I didn't have concrete preparation. So I just started thinking about future plans, different possibilities, trying to catch some concrete features of the position, maybe to understand some subtleties and so on. So the main move here is, of course, castling long, because castling short is a bit dubious, definitely because of the vulnerability of the h5 pawn. So here black has a choice, right? After white castles short, I didn't make this move, of course, but I just want to show you several interesting things. So after castling short, black has a choice also where to castle, right? To castle long or to castle short. And to be honest, castling long here will be very dubious decision. Because white already has advanced pawns, d4, c4, and it appears it is not a big problem for white to keep just pushing pawns on the queen side. So first of all, it is necessary, of course, to solve the problem of the queen on d3, because as you can see, after rook appeared on d8, it is kind of a problem for white, so it is vulnerable. Sometimes it's possible for black to play knight c5 or something like that. And for white, the most natural setup here is to push the pawn on c5, grabbing even more space, and then just to continue with the b4, a4, b5, finally just opening files and diagonals on the queen side and checkmating the king. So white has to spend some time on moving the queen somewhere, probably on e2, which is kind of typical square for queen here. So no more knight c5 or something like that. And the next will be very easy, so pawn on c5, then b4, a4, and so on. So castling long here will be dubious, but black has no problems with castling short here, so it is still a possibility. And after, for example, knight to f6, let's say rook goes to e1, quite a natural idea, right, to occupy the semi-opened e-file and exert some pressure on the bishop. So black just castles, and at first glance it looks like white has very promising idea of playing knight f5 here. Quite a typical move when the rook is already on e1 and bishop on e7 is not protected. And in fact, it is not so simple for black to make a correct decision here if black doesn't know this variation before playing it over the board. Because the bishop is hanging, taking the knight looks a bit dubious in the view of rook takes e7. So now f5 is hanging. Some sort of knight c5 tactics is not serious, because white has several interesting options here, including just queen e2, protecting the rook and attacking the queen, or just taking the queen immediately. And after knight takes d3, you can see the knight is almost trapped here. b7 is hanging, so white is much better. So knight c5 doesn't work, which means white just managed to damage black's pawn structure here on the king side and to activate his rook seriously. So this position is very promising. If rook goes to e8, for example, protecting the bishop, white also has one interesting idea, which actually appeared in one of my Blitz games. So white just starts with taking the bishop. After rook takes on e7, white continues just very actively with the knight h4, intending to occupy f5 square, using the fact that e6 pawn is still pinned. And the problem for black is that if knight takes on h5, White continues first with, let's say, queen to f3, if I remember it correctly, or just immediate knight f5. Yeah, probably just immediate knight f5. So let's see, queen f3. Yeah, queen f3 is also quite good, just attacking the knight. If knight from d7 goes to f6, then just g4, trapping that knight on h5, so knight should go back if black doesn't want to weaken his position a lot. And now white has this very interesting idea. Knight goes to f5, rook goes to e8, only move, and simply knight takes on h6. With a very dangerous attack, so pawn takes, bishop takes. White has only one pawn to compensate the missing minor piece. However, white has very dangerous dark squared bishop. As you can see, dark squares around the king are completely weakened. And white has several ideas of how to continue the attack. For example, the basic idea here, by the way, white doesn't have a direct win, I think. So, but white has a very promising idea of developing the attack quite quickly here. So basic move here is rook to e5, just closing diagonal b8 h2 for black's queen, creating a threat of queen g3 check with the checkmate on g7. And the point there that if knight takes the rook, then queen takes f6 with the checkmate on g7 inevitably. So as far as I remember, in my game, it was something like king h7. I mean, that blitz game that I already mentioned. I played something like bishop to f4, attacking the queen. Queen went to a5. And here I had a possibility to play this crazy rook to e5 move, sacrificing the rook. But the problem for black is that after knight takes, bishop takes, the knight is hanging, so I want to take it with the queen. If knight goes away somewhere, I take on f7. If not, well, I will have just an exchange sacrificed, and still this crazy attack on the king side. So as you can see, it might be very dangerous for black. So rook to e8 also looks dubious after knight to f5. But after knight f5, unfortunately, of course, for white, black has a normal move, bishop to d6. After which, white has nothing. So now knight h6 makes no sense because position is not ready for this sort of sacrifice, because white has no access to critical squares to continue with the attack. At the same time, we can see that h5 pawn is now not protected. White already has no chance to get back with the knight to g3 to protect it, because bishop already controls this square. If white, for example, takes on d6, then queen takes on d6, and as I said, h5 is about to drop. So white has serious problems here. I mean, only black has a chance to fight for a win in this case. So castling short, as you can see, might be tricky if you play, for example, a blitz game, or if you play against not very good prepared opponent. But if you understand that your opponent is prepared well, probably castling short will be a very bad choice. That was exactly what I was thinking about during the game when I had this position after queen c7. So I was just trying to compare different factors. So for example, I thought like, okay, probably my opponent never saw this sort of attack, because it is quite rare, maybe. So it might be a surprise, and maybe I will win quickly. But at the same time, he made all previous moves with a great confidence. So I just thought, okay, probably he was prepared quite well, and maybe this will be just a trap that he will easily avoid, and so on. So there was a big risk, in other words, to castle short here. Castling long, well, of course I thought about it, but at the same time I understood it is the main line probably, and my opponent is well prepared, so maybe I have to make the things not so easy for him, right? So he managed to surprise me on the move number one, and now it's time for me to try to trick him, right? That's why I finally came to queen e2 move. So maybe not the best one, uh, but at the same time not that bad, because it definitely makes sense. So as we discussed, queen on d3 is quite vulnerable in many lines when black castles long. So sooner or later I will have to put my queen somewhere, and e2 looks like a natural square. So from here my queen exerts some pressure over e file. At the same time I want to play knight e5 at the proper moment. So kind of typical outpost for the knight. My queen just supports this move. At the same time, when black plays c5, intending to open up the d file for the rook and heavy pieces, my queen is already at the safe place, being not attacked by the rook from d8, for instance. So there are several ideas connected with the queen e2 move, and it looks like just a normal decision. At the same time, I wanted to provoke my opponent to make castling here immediately, because at first glance looks like if black plays knight f6 and then castles short, I will have exactly this knight f5 possibility. So at some point it might be looking risky for black. So I thought that probably my opponent would do castling here, and the point is that if he castles, it leads exactly to the dangerous situation. So I just castle kingside now and start this very easy attack on the queen side. That's the point. So it was kind of trick. So if he castles, okay, I'm not forced to castle same side. I just castle there. But he reacted just quickly with the knight f6, which was great. Simple development move. And, well, again, he still has a choice of castling there or there. Just a very flexible approach. Here I understood that I have nothing better than just castling. It was the time to clarify the position of my king, and we discussed that castling short makes no sense. Black also castles short, and, well, I will have nothing but problems with the h5 pawn. So after castling here, he castled to the king side. So we achieved this position with opposing castles, which was quite interesting, and at least I was satisfied, because I definitely will have some chances to attack and so on. So it was exactly my intention to achieve a position in which I will have a chance to win. I wanted to win, and I needed it according to the tournament situation at the moment. At the same time, usually when black castles short and white castles long in Caro-Kann, the most natural plan of attack for white is just to move the knight from g3 away and then to play g4, g5 as quick as it's possible, just to open up files against the king, mainly in the g file, but when pawn h6 takes on g5, it is also possible to play h6 in many cases. And to do that, white usually puts the knight on e4. Again, usually it happens when the queen is still on d3. So here we can see the difference. My queen is already on e2, and if I play knight to e4, it will be kind of waste of time, right? So my queen will eventually appear on e4, but not from d3, so in one move, but after playing to e2, so in two moves. And it is not great when you have a position in which you have to be quick. When we have castles like this, right? So the one castled king side, another one castled queen side. The most natural plan is to attack the king, and tempi, the chess time, means a lot. So wasting the time this way looked a bit dubious to me. So I thought that knight e4 won't be a great idea. So I started with the king b1. Anyway, a useful move, because in many cases a2 becomes a target. At the same time, we discussed that black intends to play something like b5, after which probably the c file will be open, probably not. Another black's plan is just to play c5, in which case the c5 c file will be opened inevitably, so the king shouldn't be on c1. It will be just vulnerable there. That's why I decided to start with the king b1, preparing everything. Why didn't I play, for example, knight f5? We discussed that it could have been annoying for black. In fact, I've just calculated very easy line. E takes f5, queen takes e7, Now simply rook to e8, for example, attacking my queen, and my queen is forced to some ugly positions like b4 or a3. Well, b4 will be just very stupid because it gives black a chance even to play c5 immediately with the tempo, so probably I have to put my queen on a3, but here my queen is also ugly. And what is more importantly, black just immediately comes up with this simple play in the center, occupying this perfect square with the knight, challenging already my pawn on f2. I can't protect it with the bishop because he plays f4, and my bishop is forced back when the knight takes on f2. So I have probably to protect f2 with the help of, I don't know, rook f1 move, which looks also ugly, and then black has a perfect choice between just taking my bishop followed by queen f4, or just another knight to f6, increasing pressure against h5, maybe intending to occupy g4. So everything says black has just a perfect position and white has nothing but problems. That's why I decided not to play knight f5. It was clear it was just bad. So I played king to b1. And here my opponent played rook to e8, protecting the bishop. Well, in my opinion, it is not necessary, actually, because as we can see after knight f5, white has only problems, so it was not really a threat. But at the same time, rook e8 probably creates a square for the king in case of very dangerous attack against it. F8 may be used by the bishop, by the knights, so it is kind of useful possibility for different pieces to occupy this square in different cases. So it's very hard to predict how the things will go, but okay, having this square looks like not bad at least. And black now is ready for c5, b5, or anything else. So the basic play for white in this line was shown by Vishy Anand and his game against Bareev. So after b5, which looks the most natural move here, white has to avoid taking on b5. It will be very risky because it will lead to opening of the c file, of the b file, and despite white will win a pawn temporarily, actually black's compensation will be just great. So let's see if takes and queen b5, easily rook to b8 for example, or just knight to d5 to start with. And then rook goes to b8, another rook goes to c8, black will play against b2 pawn, so it doesn't look like a great outcome for white. So after b5, the best move for white is c5, just closing the files on the queen side, which means black will have no real chances to break through there. Okay, just weakening d5 square, but it is a lesser evil here. It is much better to weaken one square than to be checkmated, of course. And at the same time, white has some advantages after playing c5. So white managed to fix, for example, the pawn on c6, which might be a potential weakness and potential target for white's pieces. At the same time, after c5, you can see that bishop e7 is limited seriously. The same is for the knight d7. And for example, after rook to d8, white has a chance to start the attack with the g4, g5. And the best way here to do that is not knight to e4, because this will lead just to simplifying the position after knight takes e4, knight f6, and so on. So black has a problem with the knight d7, and for white it is much better to avoid this sort of exchanges. So knight f1 is better here, but I actually didn't know this game. As I said, my preparation wasn't perfect. And during the game, I didn't even consider moves like knight f1. So I was about to play c5 against b5, of course, but I wasn't sure what I will do next, right? So knight to f1, and then white prepares g4, g5, and so on. That's the point here. So if you want to know this sort of positions better, to learn them, just follow the game of Anand against Bareev, played in Moscow in 2009. Very instructive one. So my opponent played rook to e8, and here I was already not that satisfied with the result, with the opening, and of course with my position in general, because I didn't see concrete possibilities of developing my initiative. I didn't want to play knight e4 because in this case I thought, okay, if I play knight e4, he just takes, knight goes to f6, and I just help my opponent to improve his position. I don't have real chances to play g4, I waste my time, and so on. I didn't see the move knight f1, and in this position it is probably not the best plan, because black still has a chance to play c5 instead of b5, after which the position in the center will be open. Black will start just playing over c file and d file, and when I will have my knight on f1, of course I won't be prepared for this sort of play. So I needed a flexible move that combines some attacking ideas on the king side, still controlling the situation in the center. Afterwards, actually, I understood that the main move for white here is still knight to e4, and in case black takes on e4, okay, queen takes on e4, and after c5, for example, white still can play this g4 move, and simply ignoring what black does in the center, cd4, just g5, and so on. So the main idea here is to be quick and quite aggressive on the king side. Since white has some hooks like h6 pawn, white actually has no problems with opening files there, and white's initiative is quite dangerous here. Now that's the main line, knight e4. But I played a bit strange move at the same time. During the game I thought, well, it looks quite logical after all. So I played rook to h4. Not so easy to understand at first glance what I'm going to do with the rook on h4, because situation doesn't change actually. But in many lines, with the rook on h4, I mean, I have a chance to be just in time on the d file. So let's imagine if black continues with the plan of c5, cd4, well, in many cases I can just capture with the rook there, and I will have doubled rooks over d file already. In many of other cases, for example, if knight f6 somehow goes away from f6 square, I will have an interesting possibility to play rook to g4, just challenging g7 pawn and creating a threat of bishop h6. By the way, in many cases I will have a chance to sacrifice my bishop on h6 and continue with the rook g4 check and the attack. So since I understood during the game that I don't have real chances to open up the g file with the help of g4, g5, so it looked a bit slow to me. I decided to have an access to this file anyway with my heavy pieces, and that's why I played rook to h4. Another idea is to play bishop f4 in some variations, just to attack the queen. So if black does nothing here, I just play bishop to f4. If black plays b5 here, for example, I just continue with the c5. And now if knight goes to d5, I have a chance to put my rook here on g4, probably. I'm not that sure because black still has this idea of knight f6. But in many cases, I was psychologically ready to even sacrifice the exchange, so just to play something like knight e5, okay, knight takes, queen takes, and I have some sort of initiative on the king side. Maybe not exactly in this line, but it is just a feeling that I had during the game. So maybe after knight e5, I would have finally went back to, let's say, h1. Maybe I would have played something like rook e4 instead, and if knight f6, then rook goes to e5, and so on. I'm not sure, but well, at least it was the way to make the things a bit complicated over the board. My opponent reacted with the very natural move. It is c5, so why not? It is kind of programmatic play for black and Caro-Kann. This inevitably leads to opening of the files, the c file, the d file, and so on. Here at the moment I don't have anything better than playing bishop to c3, and I was ready for that. So I actually calculated some concrete variations against c5 before playing rook to h4. Of course, it wasn't a move made just according to intuition and so on. So I calculated some variations definitely. So here, if black, for instance, takes on d4, I thought I should have captured with the bishop, not with the rook, because if I take with the rook, then bishop simply goes to c5, attacking my rook, and I start being ugly a bit, so rook should go back somewhere and so on. But bishop takes d4, and my main intention here was, after, let's say, natural rook to c8, just attacking c4, to play kind of knight e4 move. So as you can see, I started gradually getting to g7 squared. So my idea is to challenge the knight f6 somehow, maybe to force it going away somewhere, maybe something else. But the point is that to open up diagonal a1, h8 completely, then to occupy g4 square with the rook and attack on the king side. So an interesting moment here. c4 looks like a hanging pawn, but in fact, if queen takes on c4, I just take on c4, and after rook c4, I just take on f6 with the bishop first, and win material, because the next move will be knight f6 check, and rook takes on c4. So that's very bad for black. So after bishop takes d4, rook c8, and knight e4, it's probably better for black just to take on e4. Here I thought of rook takes e4. And again, the question, is it possible just to capture on c4 with the queen? So here I calculated the line. It was everything before playing rook h4, a very important moment. So I saw this position in my mind, and I thought that I would have something like bishop g7, an interesting move, attacking the queen. And when queen takes e2, rook takes e2, h6 is hanging, d7 is hanging, so it looks like king takes g7 is the only move. I just take on d7 with the rook, and we can see that black has some problems maybe with the b7 pawn. So if rook goes to b8, let's say, I have a good rook c2 maneuver with rook c7 next move, so I have some pressure at least. But to be honest, this doesn't work because rook goes to d8, easily exploiting the weakness of the first rank. So this resource I didn't see over the board when I was calculating the consequences of the rook h4 move. So it is kind of deep line, right? The move number 25 already, and rook to h4 with the move number 18, and it was of course one of many other lines possible, so not so easy to estimate. Of course, rook d8, and I think position should be equal after the exchange on d8. Let's say rook takes d8, and white definitely has nothing. So instead of knight e4, maybe it's better for white to do something else, maybe knight to e5, also an interesting move. But here after rook e to d8, black is doing just fine. So position is already equal. Black has no real problems because I made several not very ambitious moves like queen e2 first prior to castling long, and then rook h4, which looked non-standard but in fact not that efficient. So no surprises that black equalizes easily here. So cd4 was possible and interesting, but my opponent also played a good move. So he played rook to c8 prior to taking on d4, and this actually reduces my possibilities because, for example, if I play knight to e4 here, intending to get to that position, well, he can start with the knight e4, and I definitely have nothing here. So if rook takes e4, then probably knight to f6, and only then taking on d4, and that's another story. And at the same time, it is an interesting option for black here, knight to play knight d5. So the point here is that if I take, he takes, he takes d5. Also not very pleasant situation, but well, probably it's better for black to avoid knight d5. We will see why in the future, and just to play knight takes e4 here with the equality. So I started calculating concrete lines. I understood that probably the normal move for white here is just to take on c5, but I wasn't satisfied with the result of this position. So knight takes c5 with the idea of getting to a4 already. I didn't want to play b3 because this just weakens my queen side, weakens my king, and so on. And I still don't have real attack on the king side. So dc5 was not very interesting. That's why I played knight e5. So at least it was a chance to make the things complicated and to provoke my opponent to win some material, because after knight e5, at first glance, looks like black can win an exchange easily. So normal continuation for black here is just to transpose to the line that we already discussed, just to take on d4, which forces me to take with the bishop. After which, not to take on e5, because in that case bishop takes e5 and I have quite active position. I mean that, as you can see, queen is attacked, c4 is protected by the rook from h4, by the way. And I can continue with different ideas, including even f4, then knight to e4, then rook to g4, or even immediately knight e4 when the queen goes away somewhere, and so on. So gradually I will get to g7 square. Another plan is just a positional play after rook to d4, doubling the rooks over d file, and also just, you know, creating some threats and improving position move by move. So instead of taking on e5, black has a much better option. It is just rook to d8 that we already discussed. And here black is doing well because black has no real weaknesses at the moment. Black has already some pressure over both c and d files. There is a concrete threat of taking the knight because the rook on d1 will be hanging after the exchange on e5. So white has to think of what to do with the rook. It's not so easy, because if rook goes back to h1, let's say c4, becomes weakened. So probably the best move for white is something like rook c1, but it already looks just at least very dry for white and quite an easy play for black. But after knight e5, what changed in the position? As you can see, rook h4 is no longer protected by the knight from f3. Which means black now has real chance just to jump with the knight from f6, attacking the rook on h4 with the bishop, and at the same time attacking something with the knight. And my opponent actually did this knight to d5 move, which was very tempting, and no surprises he chose exactly this move, because there is a feeling that black can even win the game easily after that. Because if my rook goes away somewhere and knight takes on c3, just damaging the pawn structure and the queen side completely, and weakening my king, also grabbing the very important bishop, and so on. But of course I was prepared for this outcome, and knight e5, as you can see, was kind of psychological decision. So of course I calculated the consequences of this knight e5 move. I was ready to sacrifice the exchange when I made this knight e5 move, of course. I had some concrete positions in my mind for this case. And at the same time, I thought, okay, it is probably the only chance now to probably to try to play for a win, because almost everything else leads to very easy play for black. And only this move just provokes black to get to this quite complicated position. And it appeared it was quite an interesting exchange sacrifice, not really standard. Of course, I was a bit nervous because there is no concrete win for white, of course, after bishop takes h4 and so on. It leads only for the position in which white has a sort of compensation and some pressure. So there are a lot of different possibilities for black to make a mistake. That was the point. So to exert some psychological pressure, at the same time, it was already the move number 20. We had a time control of making 40 moves in 2 hours. And to this moment, we already spent some time, both. So I was thinking during the opening stage. My opponent started thinking seriously already in the middle game stage, especially after rook h4 move and so on. So I wanted also to achieve a bit complicated position, because in that case my opponent will be forced to spend even more time. And when it goes to the time pressure, well, the quality of decisions made naturally decreases. So when you have less time to make a decision, usually you make not that great decisions. So it was another intention to achieve a position like that. So after knight d5, of course, white should take. White has to take on d5, otherwise black is just much better. Bishop takes on h4. At first glance looks like, well, black is just an exchange up, nothing really happens, but the first point is that white has very important intermediate move here and very strong one. It is d6. So if I don't play d6, well, position might be opened, and we should understand that black strives to opening up the game because black has rooks, and rooks are active only on open files. So the more open files exist in the position, the better rooks become. So to make it a compensation, right, I have to close the position. Of course, I have to save some open maybe diagonals for my pieces and some possibilities to counterattack, but in general, I have to strive to closed positions to make opponent's rooks passive. And here, of course, not d5 takes e6 or something like that, but d6. Just a very active move, already attacking the queen. And the problem for black is that queen takes d6 loses immediately to d4 takes c5. So as you can see, queen is attacked twice by the pawn and by my rook, and knight on d7 is hanging. So next move I will just capture the knight, and I will have two minor pieces, and I will have a material advantage, hence. So queen d6 loses. And another part of the same problem is that queen is pinned to protecting knight d7, so it's not possible to occupy any square here. So the only square to occupy with the queen is d8, definitely. So queen goes to d8. And here it is a critical moment. So now we can see that what white achieved. White achieved quite strong knight on e5. At the same time, very strong pawn on d6. So it is a passed pawn. Moreover, we can see a motive. Rooks are on c8 and e8. So when the knight, for example, goes away somewhere from d7, in many cases, white will have a chance to push the pawn to d7 with the fork. That's kind of tactical motive here. But of course, my main intention was to force the knight d7 to capture my knight on e5, after which I recapture with the d4 pawn, and I will have this protected passed pawn on d6. I will have a great advantage in space on the king side. So it will be just a great compensation for the exchange. Probably I will be even better. That's the point here. But how to provoke this knight takes e5? It's not so easy. So my first idea when I started calculating this possibility of exchange sacrifice was, of course, to play queen to b5. So it was the first move that I calculated because it suits my plan. So if knight takes on e5, of course I take with the pawn, and I will have a good position, threatening already d7 and so on. But the problem for me here is that black exchanges a lot of pieces, and first of all, he starts with the bishop takes g3, damaging my pawn structure, and after f takes g3, he just takes on e5. And it appears that after d takes e5, okay, I achieved my main goal, but at the same time, I no longer have this flexible pawn structure, so I don't have a chance to play something like f4, g4, f5, no longer, because my pawns are damaged here. And at the same time, when my queen is on b5, my rook on d1 is not protected, so black has a brilliant resource of playing rook e7 here, and black should be better. So this rook goes to d7, then blockading my d6, and gradually black starts just challenging my queen with the a6, b5, b4, c4, and so on. So of course black will have serious problems with converting the material advantage here. At the same time, I don't really have a counterplay, so this position is definitely not good. But over the board, I calculated another variation which was also not that pleasant to me. So just c takes d4 at this point. Bishop takes d4, knight takes e5, bishop takes a5, and simply a6, just attacking my queen. And after queen takes b7, rook goes to c5. So in this case, I definitely have some compensation for the exchange because my pawn is still very dangerous. But at the same time, I didn't want to play the position like this, in which I don't have so much attacking resources. And again, Now, when it goes to the time pressure, to the time trouble situation, it's better to have more complicated position with less, how to say, with so this position is simply quite easy for black to play, so it's clear what to do. So it's necessary to watch the passed pawn, it's necessary to activate heavy pieces when it's possible, to attack my weaknesses, and all the weaknesses are quite noticeable. So pawn on h5, for example, my king, and so on. So it was not the sort of position I wanted to achieve. That's why I finally rejected playing queen b5. So what else? After queen d8, then soon after, when I realized that his next move will be bishop takes g3, I just started calculating knight to e4, which looks like a natural continuation of my attack, right? So after knight goes to e4, as we can see, I challenge the pawn on c5. At the same time, I go away from this g3 square, which was not promising anyway. And at the same time, we can see now that bishop on h4 is out of play, and I have some concrete threats connected with playing something like g3, f4, and so on, just attacking the bishop. So I started calculating knight e4 line. And here, well, I had, of course, many different problems with evaluation, because position is really unclear and non-standard. So my compensation is based on the fact that opponent's rooks are still passive. Position is not that open. I have pawn on d6. I have a good concentration of pieces on in the center, and they are ready to get to the king side as soon as possible. But as for material, we can see I sacrificed the exchange for no material compensation. So the quantity of pawns is even for both sides. So I was a bit nervous, of course. I wasn't completely sure what will happen finally, but at the same time I had the feeling that it should be good. At least it suits my goals, and position looks really interesting. So what I calculated here, of course I started with the cd4, the most natural move, because knight takes e5 will be a serious mistake. I just take with the pawn on e5. I have a direct threat of d7, attacking both rooks, and black at the same time has a problem with the bishop, because if, for example, rook goes away, I just play g3 and trap the bishop. When the bishop is on g5, I play f4. So after d takes e5, queen d7 is necessary, but now I just play queen g4, again attacking the bishop, and then immediately knight to f6 and win. So the game is over after that. E takes f6 and decisive attack, which will lead to a checkmate very soon, I guess. So knight e5 will be a serious mistake. Another possibility after knight goes to e4 was probably to play f5. That was one of the main lines that I considered for my opponent. Immediate f5, I mean, because in this case, as we can see, he forces me actually to make knight takes c5 move. So after knight e4, of course, I wanted to take on c5 with the pawn, after which I will have a great pressure in the center, great pawns in the center. But after f5, he forces me to take with the knight, which might be not that pleasant. And I had some problems with calculating this line. I mean, I didn't find the best option for me quickly. But then I just continued, just kept calculating, and I'm really happy that I found the best way. And computer analysis afterwards just assessed that everything was correct. So knight takes on c5 here, and the point is that black doesn't take on c5, which leads to exactly d4 takes c5, and then d7, very bad position for black. So he takes on e5 instead. The point here is that if I take with the pawn on e5, which was my initial idea when he takes on e5, my knight on c5 is hanging. So that will be just lost, so I have to take with the queen. And now he starts this bishop f6 play. So bishop comes back to normal position, protecting diagonal, very important one. And at the same time, forces my queen to go away from this very promising position on the long diagonal. So I found queen g3 in my head, of course. So it was a calculation process. Still protecting d7, the d6 pawn, and intending to play d7. And the point of having the queen on g3, that's this queen goes to g6 then. For instance, the most natural black's reaction here is to play rook to c6. So in this case, as you can see, black meets the threat of d7, at the same time attacking my d6 pawn. And now the problem for me that if I play d7, the rook simply goes to f8, and now I have a problem. Because e6 is now protected by the rook. Whenever my knight goes away from c5, d7 drops, so black has no problems here. And that was the first position that appeared in my mind when I calculated this line. So after d7, rook goes to f8. And I was about just to break calculation at that point because I didn't see a good continuation. So d6 is just hanging, right? But then I realized, so in many cases it is not that easy for black to take on d6. So I thought that if rook takes on d6, right, I have knight to b7 fork, right? So I just phrased the problem and understood that I have to prevent queen takes d6. And I found the best move for white. So it is queen to g6, very tricky one, at the same time quite natural because I occupy the most weakened square in black's position. So after queen g6, as you can see, my queen exerts pressure on e8. So queen can't take on d6. d6 pawn appears invulnerable. And black has problems now, because in addition to different threats like knight takes b7, simply attacking the queen and grabbing one more pawn, in addition to threats like d7, in some cases, I have additional one, it is d5, attacking the rook and taking the bishop on f6. So when I saw this position with the queen g6, when I visualized it and understood all the power of white's pieces, I just broke calculation of this line because I had a feeling that I definitely have great compensation for the exchange here. I definitely have some play and appeared that white is just better here, in fact. So during the post-mortem analysis with my opponent, we found one cute line. If black, for example, plays b6 here, just attacking my knight. So here I exactly perform my main idea. So d5, attacking the rook and the bishop on f6 at the same time. And if rook takes on c5, which looks like the only move, bishop takes on f6. As you can see, black still has this problem of the queen, which is pinned to protecting the rook on e8. So queen is forced to d7, and now I just take on g7, completely exposing the king, and black has no defense. So my threat is very simple. I want to just put my bishop somewhere away and just checkmate the king. So the only move is queen f7 probably, and now I have another nice solution. It is d6 to d7 move, just trying to deflect the queen. And the point here is that if queen takes my queen, I easily take with the pawn, and now my pawns simply promote. So when the rook goes to d8, for example, d5 takes e6, and d7 is inevitable, or bishop to f6. So white wins in this line. So after queen g6, white has a serious advantage, and I'm really happy that I managed to predict this position, to visualize it, and to evaluate it correctly prior to playing knight to e5 move in the very start, at the very beginning of the whole combination of sacrificing the exchange. That was the line I was proud of, actually. So it was about immediate f5 here after knight to e4. So what else? Actually, the best move for black is just c takes d4, and it is the most critical one. I also calculated it prior to sacrificing an exchange, but here I had some problems. Again, in critical lines, white is okay, but not more than okay. In fact, black has a defense. So bishop takes d4. And here I was focused on mainly moves like, for example, knight f6, bishop to f6, knight takes e5, and I completely missed the f7, f5 possibility that actually happened in our game. So I didn't see this f5 possibility when I was making a decision of playing knight to e5, but soon after, when I did several moves in this sequence, I realized that, okay, he can play f5, not immediately, but after taking on d4, and this version is much better for black than initial f7, f5, because I don't have a chance to play knight to c5 move in this case. So what else? For example, if knight takes on e5, bishop takes e5, I have a threat of d7. At the same time, I have a threat of queen to g4. So here, after queen d7, let's say queen to g4, f5, queen takes h4, f takes e4, queen takes e4. Probably black is more or less fine, of course. So black has no big risk of being lost, but at the same time, I definitely have very pleasant position. So I have extremely strong bishop on e5, which is by no means worse than the rook. I have a pressure on g7, I have g6 square for my queen, I have a chance to just push pawns f4, g4, followed by g5, and so on. I have very good pawn on d6, so white's compensation here is noticeable and very clear. So probably it was one of possible ways for black to play, and it was much better than what black did in the game finally. But still, as you can see, white is not worse. Minimum, maybe a bit better, but maybe this advantage, let's call it this way, is not that great. But still, it was much better than having an equal position with no chances to win the game, right? So it was about knight e5. What else? For example, after bishop to f6, I had a chance to play f4. So that was my intention, maintaining this pressure in the center and waiting for, let's say, bishop takes e5, f takes e5. After which, I think I have a compensation again, because as you can see, I still have a chance to open up files on the king side with the g4, g5, and black is still quite passive here. So black has a chance, of course, to activate his pieces a bit, but still, after several moves, we can see that white has chances. So rook to g1, then I have to make a square for my king if necessary, but my main intention, of course, is to play g5. So position is quite complicated, exactly what I wanted to achieve. But this line also deserved attention for black. So bishop to f6. And finally, knight to f6, another move that I calculated, was definitely the worst one for black. So that here I just take on f6 and then d7. That's it. Game is over. Since after bishop e5, I have an intermediate check on e8, and then queen takes e5 with an extra minor piece. And finally, f5. Also a good move. A bit risky one, but quite natural, because black's main plan is to kick my knight away from the center, which means I will have less chances to attack on the king side. And my first intention when I calculated that, already being in the process of sacrificing the exchange, was to play knight to c3. So I thought, okay, he plays bishop to f6, let's say, I play f4, and I still have chances, and so on. But my problem here is that after knight c3, and let's say even knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and queen d7, again, if bishop f6, I can play f4, and so on. But the main problem is that my knight is misplaced. So my knight is far away from the king side, my knight is far away and actually has no chances to occupy c5, challenging the queen. It's not possible to occupy e5. So this looks like not the complete compensation for missing exchange, and I thought I would have no chances to play for a win in such a situation. That's why after f5, I changed my mind and found another great resource. So actually mainly a psychological one, because already here we had some sort of time pressure both. So I played g3. An interesting move, just counter-attacking the opponent's minor piece instead of moving my hanging knight from e4. And my main point is that I want to just take on h4, opening the g file, getting the direct access to opponent's king. That was quite surprising for my opponent. He completely missed this resource for white and actually quickly lost the game. So he started thinking a lot and having this time pressure, and at the same time a very complicated position. Well, probably overestimated my attacking possibilities in many lines and underestimated his defensive possibilities, and made a mistake on the next move. So let's see what to do here. Actually, black has two options: to take my knight on e4, or just to move the bishop to g5 or to f6. So let's have a look on bishop to f6 move, which looks like the most natural one. So here I wanted to take on f6, and after knight takes f6, I don't have really nothing connected with the d7. It was, by the way, one of moves that I calculated a lot, but I found some simple resources for black. For example, after d7, knight takes d7, looks like I have an interesting play over the d file using the pin. But after bishop c3, now black has different resources to protect the knight on d7, including rook e7 and rook c7. But the most convincing line here is rook takes c3, actually. Because if I take the rook, queen goes to b6 with check, then knight takes on e5, and I have very bad position, and at the same time I'm a pawn down. So that is definitely a bad result for me. And if I take on d7 here, black has a great queen b6 move. Just pinning my b2 pawn, black is still an exchange up, and I have no direct access to opponent's king. At the same time, black is about to activate the rook e8 through c8 and just checkmate me. So I was upset with this line, and I quickly understood that d7 can't work here. After several calculations here, I understood that I had only one resource here, and I found it, and it appears the best one for white. It is, again, phrasing the problem, right? So I don't have a chance to play d7. I need to continue with the attack against the king. d6 is hanging at the moment. How to make it not hanging? And it is knight to g6 move. Extremely complicated position arises here because my knight occupies a very strong position on the weakened square, very close to the king. I have an intention of playing knight to e7 at some point. d6 pawn is now invulnerable, because if queen takes, then bishop takes on f6. At the same time, I have several threats connected with bishop takes f6. Well, direct threat is bishop f6 followed by d7. In many cases, I can take f6 even if I don't have d7 next move, and so on. And what is more importantly, I can play positionally here. So with just taking my time, improving my position, for example, f4, fixing the weakness on e6, occupying e5 with the queen, with the bishop, or something like that. So still looks like I have a good compensation here. Interesting lines, and the critical one that I also calculated was knight to d5 here, just activating the knight, closing the d file, attacking d6, and controlling e7. So here I still have a chance to play knight to e7, because if he takes with the knight, then queen takes on e6 winning the game, because of next d7, just winning material back and continue with the attack against the king. So rook takes e7 is necessary here, and then pawn takes, queen takes, bishop takes on g7, concrete move. So if queen takes, queen e6 check and takes the rook, and if king takes, then rook takes on d5. And well, actually I achieved not that much, because the material is even here, but look at that guy on g7, so it is definitely exposed. I have some chances to attack e6 pawn. I have better pawn structure, so I still have chances, and position is still not that easy for black to play. So it was a good line, and knight g6 was just critical. Another possibility after g3 for black is to take my knight on e4. And this looks counterintuitive, because black damages his pawn structure, at the same time giving me a chance to take the bishop on h4. So here I wanted to take on h4, of course, opening the g file. And what is more importantly, in many cases, I have an access to g4 square now with my queen, which is also quite promising. So here, the best move for black is just to capture on e5. But I also calculated the knight f6 possibilities, because as you can see, position is different if compared to variation of bishop f6 that we already discussed. So I had to check if knight f6 works fine for white here. So I had a feeling that it should be good. However, I still was not sure about that. So the main line that I calculated here was d7, so the most promising move, the most tempting one. And I thought that the difference that the pawn is already on e4, I have an access to g4, should change the estimation of the line with the d7. So knight takes on d7, bishop goes to c3, so the same line as you can see, but with my pawn on h4 and his pawn on e4 instead of f5 and g3. So rook takes c3, rook takes d7, queen goes to f6. Here, the best move, but I thought of only queen b6 during the game. I calculated that, and here I thought of playing queen g4, just attacking g7. It looks like white wins because black has no checks at first glance, and it's not possible to protect g7. But then I noticed the results of rook to c1 check, crazy one. So king takes c1, queen c5 check, and black manages to protect g7. So queen takes e5 next move, or for example, if I play knight c4, then queen takes, let's say king to d2, queen b4 check, and then queen goes to f8 at least. So black is fine here. And then I finally found an interesting option. So after, queen b6, I have rook g7. So I also calculated that line. I had a feeling that I should win there. Maybe I didn't see everything here, but okay. After queen g4 appears that white simply wins because of the d7 fork. So if king goes to f8 or f6, I have knight d7 winning the queen. Otherwise, I just checkmate the king. That's it, game is over. But the problem, the general problem with this whole line is that after rook d7, black is not forced to get to b6, pinning my b2 pawn, and instead has a chance to play to f6 or a5, immediately challenging my knight. So here, if I take the rook, he takes on e5, and he has a couple of extra pawns and, well, good position of pieces. I don't have real chances there. And if my knight, for example, goes to g4, well, queen goes to f3, and black is fine. Black wins, simply. So black manages to activate heavy pieces. I don't have winning attack, so I don't have real chances to compensate the missing exchange. So actually this line with the d7 doesn't work in this case, but okay, I still had the chance to play knight g6, so even here it works fine. Same ideas connected with the things of knight e7 and so on. So for example, after rook c6, I can just protect my pawn on d6, and after knight e5, I just take with the queen on e4. And look, my pieces are very active here. I definitely have a compensation. I have attacking prospects on the king side. I have the g file, which is open, additional attacking resource for me. So probably if my opponent would have played this line, I would eventually get to knight g6. Well, I just saw that resource in another line that I've already calculated. So it was just a question of reassessing my previous evaluations, just critical recalculation of this concrete line, and probably I would have ended up with this knight g6 decision in that case. So after g3, black still had chances to achieve a decent position, maybe not that active, maybe with some problems after both f takes e4 or bishop to f6. But my opponent just overestimated my attacking possibilities in those lines, probably underestimated his defensive resources, and just played bishop g5. And this appeared a decisive mistake because in this case I have a great attacking resource. So first I start with knight takes g5. As you can see, if queen takes g5, then knight d7 drops. So h6 takes g5 is forced. And what my opponent missed, and what I had in my mind every time when I calculated different lines, that in such a case I will have a attacking resource based on h6, because this weakens opponent's king side completely. As you can see, now I have a chance to get to h5 square with my queen in many lines. So here black is simply lost. What happens? If pawn takes, then queen h5 wins immediately. So queen g6 is, or queen f7, black has no real defense, no chances. So even if knight takes e5 here, okay, bishop takes. And again, no suitable defense. Queen goes to g6, capturing everything here on the king side and adding the rook to the attack. If after h6, for example, black plays knight f6, white wins in a very nice way, starting with a d7. And after knight takes d7, h7 now. So instead of opening the files, we just force some material gains, right? Because if king goes to h8, knight goes to f7, at least winning the queen, but there should be a checkmate as well. So after h7, king should take, after which it is a forced mate. Queen h5, king g8, queen f7 check, and then rook to h1. So as you can see, after h6, black has nothing better than playing knight takes e5, because h7 is already a threat, winning the game. So knight takes e5, and now queen takes e5, simply creating this great attacking tandem of the bishop and the queen, getting to g7 square, the most tempting point in black's position. At the same time, still having this threat of d7. So queen to d7 is the only resource for black. And here the last tricky moment, actually. So the most natural continuation for white here is to take on g7, right? Just intended rook to h1. And white still has a winning position. But after queen c6, one of a sudden, it is not that easy. And I just remind you that we already had a time pressure, time trouble. So I didn't want to give my opponent this chance. So after queen c6, as you can see, queen controls h1 square. At the same time, creating a sort of queen c2, followed by checkmate. So I will have to play something like queen e2 in this case. And well, this just doesn't look like the most pleasant outcome of the whole combination. So instead of that, I realized that until I take on g7, queen has no real chances to move anywhere because queen is pinned to g7. So I just took my time and played rook h1 first, right? So if queen moves away somewhere, I just take on g7 with the checkmate. Otherwise, I just take on g7 and I already have a threat of rook h8. And everything finished with the nice checkmate. So after rook c4, only chance is just to capture my bishop. Otherwise, I just checkmate the king without problems. Pawn takes on g7, rook takes d4. And now if queen takes d4, well, queen takes g7 and black will still fighting. So rook h8 instead, of course. And after king f7, I had very simple win after just g8 and rook h7. But I saw a very interesting and nice checkmate in final here. So I came up with the rook f8, rook takes f8, pawn takes f8, queen in, king takes f8, now check on h8, forcing the king to f7 only, now queen h7. So if king goes to f6, I just take on d7, winning the queen, and here my opponent realized already that he's lost and generously just allowed me to checkmate him. That is a sign of a good person, actually. So king goes to e8, and queen goes to g8 with a checkmate. So nice checkmate in final of the whole sequence of moves, and actually I was completely satisfied with the result, with the character of the game, and despite in many lines actually my opponent had a chance to achieve a decent position, the level of complexity was very high for both of us. So I didn't have a clear understanding what is going on the board. Of course, I had concrete understanding of positions that will arise in critical lines, because I calculated a lot. I calculated very deep, and I found many different non-obvious resources, just calculating everything in my mind, so that was fine. At the same time, I was satisfied because I probably made the most efficient decision that I could in those conditions. I mean, at the moment when I played knight to e5, because if I don't play knight e5, well, position becomes really dry and black has no problems. So probably I would have outplayed my opponent later, but there was a great risk of just finishing the game in a draw or even losing, because after, as I said, let's say dc5, knight c5, actually black achieves very good position with a very clear plan of knight a4 and so on. So knight e5 was the only way to provoke my opponent to go to this extremely complicated position with an extra exchange, which was not clear until the very end, and there were many different subtleties and possibilities to make a mistake for both of us, and very good that I managed to avoid most of that traps and came up with this result. So as you can see, making decisions in the real game is a mix of proper calculation, proper evaluation, and at the same time just taking into account, keeping in mind some other factors, mainly psychological ones, the factor of the situation on the clock, so what is going on to the time that is left for both opponents. Also understanding the tournament situation and just weighing the risks, right? So sometimes you have to take this sort of risk. Sometimes it's better to play in a more solid way, and so on. So all this creates this model of making a decision in a real game. But the core of this decision-making process is still a proper calculation. So as you can see, you never have a chance to come up with such an idea of sacrificing an exchange when you don't see these critical lines, when you can't calculate them, and so on. So everything is based anyway on the proper calculation, and we will continue developing our algorithm and work on proper calculation techniques during next shows. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you very much for being with me, and I'm sorry for these technical problems. Looks like it is a story of my life, so they appear every week, but I hope next week we will avoid those stuff, irritating one, I mean. Don't miss the live broadcast from St. Louis. It should be already on air, so just check the sidebar for the link, and see you later this week, hopefully with the Banter Blitz show, and next week with the episode number 6 of Training Tuesday. Take care. Bye bye.